Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Tucker. I'm a colleague of Paul's, and I welcome you here to the U of R. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on Treaty 4 territory. It's the traditional land of the Cree, the Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and also the homeland of the Métis people. Our speaker today, my colleague Dr. Paul Sinclair, is an associate professor in the Faculty of Business Administration. Paul grew up on a farm near Fort Capel. He has a PhD from Osaka University of Foreign Studies and an MBA in International Business from the University of Alberta. He speaks both Chinese and Japanese. Paul is keenly interested in the global transportation hub concept in international business. He's also completed a study on the GTH in 2014 with a small team in our faculty. He teaches business communications and international business in the faculty, and he's been running a farm and a small export business for the past 5 years with a partner. So I welcome Paul, look forward to your talk, and there's time for questions and discussion following the presentation. Thank you, Paul.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sean, for the introduction, and I have to say, once I started speaking out a bit on the Global Transportation Hub, it's Sean who really put me up to this and said, you know, you should do a public talk. And so here I am. I'm really glad everybody came. It's really nice to see everybody. Some of my colleagues and people from the business community and family even, so it's great. And so the talk I'm going to give is about the future of the Global Transportation Hub, what's at stake for Saskatchewan agriculture. And I'll just give you a little context for the talk today, which was, you know, over the past year, the Global Transportation Hub has really been in the news and sort of basically got hammered in the media. And during that whole period, I was waiting for someone to speak up. And I thought someone would say, you know, is this the end of a government-led containerization strategy? And I thought someone would say, well, you know, Saskatchewan, I thought we had a deal here. We were going to do this. And so, you know, it was just that nobody who I thought was behind containerization of agricultural products said anything. And so that's kind of where it started. And it started with me with a little write-up for the Leader Post and kind of spiraled into this. So, I want to talk today about what I see as Saskatchewan's problem. Why we have to containerize agricultural products here. I'm going to talk about a little case why that demonstrates why we need government support for something like containerization, and then just some ideas at the end of how we move forward. So this map sort of shows you what Saskatchewan's challenge is, and anybody who's ever waited at the railroad tracks knows that our railway system is clogged with a bunch of materials. So petroleum and coal and lumber and potash and bulk grain. And adding to that problem with agriculture is we can't get containers to ship high value products. And so it's really obvious why that would be the case. So hundreds of thousands of containers come in from the ports on the west, and they go to these dense urban markets over here. But from the perspective of railways and shipping companies, it's cheaper and more efficient just to ship them back to these high-value markets in Asia than it is to fool around and drop them off at Winnipeg and Regina and Saskatoon and Edmonton and Calgary. And sort of a third problem with that is all of these little blue dots here that I've marked, they're all sort of they've been competing with each other for the Logistics Center of Canada title. And sort of the idea of having a hub is sort of part of that. And so the second problem is that we're really relying on low-value agricultural products. And I really find it frustrating when I hear this argument that we've got to feed China's growing appetite. And India has a growing appetite as well. And I think that probably that's self-evident. You know, we shipped $1 billion worth of canola to China last year. That's going up. But I say to them, you know, is it not true that it's China that is actually the agricultural superpower here. Because look what they did last year. They exported twice what we did in Canada. And if you look at Shandong province, which like Saskatchewan, it has 21-22% of the agri-food exports. They did twice what we did. And the reason they're doing that is because they're selling higher value products. It's not that they're doing more than we have. And we'll talk more about containers in a moment. The third problem here is that these networks, global food trade networks, are happening without us. And this is a map that I got from Economist magazine, which shows China's one belt, one road sort of trade network. And what I find compelling about this map is that as of early 2018, or maybe this fall, I can't remember, more than 5,000 trains have come back from Europe through the Altai Pass here to China. And so what you have is you have consumers in these central second-tier Chinese cities who are drinking milk from Belarus and wine from the Bordeaux region. And it came by train, it came in containers. And what they're doing is building this network of basically container ports. They didn't even say we're making a network of container ports because that's too obvious to say. Of course they're container ports. So, you know, who would have thought of the importance of Ethiopia, right? So this Djibouti port here, it can do about 350,000 lifts, so it's about the capacity of the global transportation hub. And what's going to start happening is it's going to start emptying out agricultural products from Ethiopia, of course, you know, oil seeds and beans and coffee and so on. But basically Africa in general, because the Chinese, you know, built a railroad into the interior, and they have, you know, a free trade zone there. So we're missing out on these kind of networks by saying we're only doing, you know, bulk products, right? And it's not like, you know, the idea of a transportation hub, a global transportation hub, is like some sort of flaky or aspirational idea. Other developed countries have done it, and these are the freight villages in Germany. And when I'm talking about these freight villages, I'm really talking about a very simple idea, which is the interface between short distance transportation and long distance. So it's basically the local and the domestic meets the international. And recently, our government has kind of waffled on whether it's going to support this project. And so, of course, there was this announcement in July, we need to look for something else for the global transportation hub. And I was like, okay, you know, what exactly is that? And a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, I drove my worn-out Jetta along the #1 highway here and got on the bypass, and I was basically saying, holy crap, this is an amazing infrastructure that could support 50 or 60,000 containers going in and out of Regina every year. And some people say, okay, you know, private industry is going to get us out of this. The government should not be involved in this business. And, you know, this is what I would say to that. So this is a picture of Bill Ackman, and he's what they call an activist investor. And so back in 2011 or so, he basically said, you know, look, Canadian Pacific, it's a good company, but it's inefficient. You know, its operating ratio is way too high, it costs them way too much money for the amount of revenue they're bringing in. And so he sort of moved to get a guy by the name of Hunter Harrison installed in CP, and so, of course, Hunter Harrison made drastic reforms. You know, right around 2013, he retired the whole fleet. Maybe not the whole fleet, but there were like 58 SD90 train engines. He said, you know, these things break down, they're inefficient, we don't want them. He made the trains longer, and he backed off on containerization because it didn't, in his mind, make sense to him. So, you know, my question for Saskatchewan would be, do we want Wall Street bankers to make decisions about the prosperity of our province? And the answer to me is no. But, you know, we'll leave it at that. So to me, containerization is the crucial link to the global agri-food economy. And we're still we're still pretending that it's an option, that this is something we could do or could not do if we're interested. So now I'm going to say, why should we containerize agricultural products? And I'm not sure this argument has really been, articulated to the Joe Blow population in Saskatchewan. But basically, containerization started in the docks, right? And it used to be like this. You've got inefficiency and delays and frustrations, and you've got what they're called breaking bulk, which you take stuff out of one container and put it into another, so unload it and reload it. And you got crime, right? And longshoremen used to be associated with crime, and so it ended up this, right? So this is a picture of Malcolm McLean, and Malcolm McLean was the guy who invented the container. And so he looked down over the docks in 1937, and he basically said, this is stupid. We should be just moving the entire warehouse, and we won't have any of that mess at the dock, so that the seller can stuff the container, and the person who buys it can unstuff it. And that's basically what happened. I want to make 2 points about this guy. One was there was huge resistance from the Longshoremen's Association, among other people who hated this idea. And the second thing is that he also went bankrupt, which is interesting. I think he went bankrupt in the early 70s because he bought really fast-moving ships, but he didn't take into account what it would cost to run them. So he made some crucial mistakes, and so containerization happens in fits and starts. So why would we containerize, right? And so if I gave you a piece of paper and a pencil, all of you could probably come up with this in 10 minutes if you thought long enough, right? So you have this standardization of size, which allows you to do things faster. So you've got faster turnarounds, which reduces your cost. You don't need any warehouses because containers are warehouses. You need a container yard, basically. It solved all the longshoremen's crimes issue, and you could basically put liquids in it, you could put lumber in it, you could put grains in it. So of course there were some disadvantages. You have things like you have to convince the ports that they have to make some capital investments to handle these things. You've got problems with repositioning. And, I'll talk about competition between modes and so on. Now, it's also a huge advantage to agriculture. So what you see on the right is what is called a Panamax size ship. So this one has 7 holds in it, and each hold holds 300,000 bushels of soybeans or wheat or something like that. 2.1 million bushels. And so, of course, this is a huge efficiency to ship things bulk like this. But it does have some significant disadvantages. So oftentimes, our grain, our bulk cars, it'll be sitting in the port 17 or 18 days before it actually gets loaded. These ships might be waiting outside somewhere to get loaded. We've got these massive high capital transactions where all of this product is going to go to 5 or 6 buyers, and then brokers are going to come in and it's going to be distributed that way. We've got these huge pipeline inventories that are necessary. So you've got, right now around the world, you've got all these dilapidated warehouses to store this stuff. Big infrastructure at the port. And so what happened with containers was these small and medium-sized importers said, you know what, we can go right to the source and we can get an identity-preserved product shipped directly to us. We don't have to deal with any of this hassle. And so we can use, for example, 1 container at a time, which is really all that we need. We can unload right out of the container. There's identity preservation. We can use refrigeration if we want, and then there are all these empty containers going back to us that we can use. So there are, of course, some disadvantages, but basically they were advantages. So some of the disadvantages would be we've got an imbalance of 40-foot containers and 20-foot containers. And the reason is simple. is that these high-value retail items that are coming from Asia right now, bicycles and whatever, they're bulky, but they take up space. Whereas we want 20-foot containers for our agriculture products because they're heavy and we can't fill up 40-foot anyway, so we don't want to pay for the extra space. There is, issues with repositioning them that I mentioned early in my presentation, cleanliness, seasonality, but basically it's a really good deal for agriculture. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So, but the problem is that containerization is not in everybody's interest. And before I start talking about that specific issue, I want to talk about the three modes here. So there are basically three modes: the maritime shippers, the trucking companies, and the railways here. And so these are different shipping modes, and they develop independently of each other. So they reduce the inefficiencies on their own terms, and they didn't really see each other as collaborators or customers. And that led to inefficiencies. And so let's look at these sort of 6 stakeholders here. For whatever reason, not one of that group is really that enthused about containerization. So let's look, for example, at the shippers. They want their assets filled and in motion. They don't want them laying around in a container yard in CP in Regina. They want empty backhauls rather than fooling around with something that's not profitable. The trucking companies typically have filled the gaps in where the modes don't cooperate with each other. So a truck will go out and pick up a machine that came in a container and bring it back to Saskatchewan. Or it might take a load of specialty crops out to the port and where it's transloaded into a container. So they make money doing that. The freight forwarders, they make money dealing with this bureaucracy between all of these different players. The railroads have a revenue cap that says, you can only earn this much money with shipping grain. So is there an incentive to go whole hog on containerization? Maybe not. The primary producers, and we'll talk a bit more about them in a moment, but they reduce their financial risk greatly by not experimenting with new agricultural products. Right? They get their cropping information from these input companies that tell them, use this fertilizer, buy this seed, spray at this rate. And they don't want to deal with freight forwarders, right? The grain companies looks after them. And then the input companies themselves, they make most of their money by, dealing with a small number of products. And so that's how it works. Now, a freight village can rationalize some of these dysfunctions. So you've got this operating company at the center, and then it's playing this sort of go-between role with a bunch of other players. You've got freight forwarders and logistics companies, and you've got light processing, and you've got all these things sort of going on that can sort of bring those players from the former slide together. So, kidney beans. I want to show you a case that sort of, in my view at least, demonstrates why we need government support for these kinds of projects. And so I'd like to step back and talk about the intersection between information technology and containers. And so this is an insight that everybody sort of understands nowadays. Anybody who uses Amazon or subscribes to Netflix kind of understands this principle, but we didn't understand it well in the mid-2000s, which is the principle of the long tail. So Chris Anderson, I think he was the editor of Wired magazine or something like that, he was surprised when he looked at the numbers of songs that were downloaded. And he expected that many more like the number of hits, ABBA or, I don't know, whatever's popular, would be way outweigh the sort of things out on the tail, which was the marginal, one-hit wonder kinds of things. And that surprised him, and he realized, and we realized all at the same time, that this long tail is a market in and of itself. And so why does it matter to agriculture? It's because it's happening, this combination of information technology and containerization is happening in global agriculture right now. So if you don't believe me, look at the port in Shandong, right? That's what it looks like. And these are the numbers. They're in billions to, they're not like us. You know, most of their customers aren't sort of concentrated in one part of the world. They're shipping stuff to Japan, to the EU, to the Asian countries, Korea, the US. These are all places we want to go to, right? And it's because of the container. But the problem is that in Saskatchewan, this long tail is too thin. It's way too thin. So for my beans, I don't know, say, head out somewhere way east of here, right? And you know, in my experience doing this is that we get hundreds and hundreds of delegates come in every year interested in our products. And they're interested, like this is just my personal experience, so Martosa could chime in here, but my experience is that they're often interested in some sort of specialty market. So they're making pet food, they're doing something with nutraceuticals, or they have, you know, they want organic stuff. And they say, and we say to them, you know, let me tell you just how great we are at doing this. And then we say, on top of that, we've got this really great railroad system, right? And my answer to that is there's a huge mismatch there. So I wanted to say, let's just say we use information technology that's, let's not use anything password protected, and let's find some information here. So let's talk about beans, right? So if you put beans, and you'll eventually stumble on this document. It's a document that US Dry Beans publishes. And so we're looking at North Dakota, right? So we can assume that maybe the climate doesn't change drastically at our southern border. Let's look at kidney beans, okay? I'm interested in kidney beans. Let's see if we can grow kidney beans in Saskatchewan. So again, this is just trade data that you just stumble upon. You don't have to look hard for this. But it tells me that last year from Canada, about $103 million worth of product went out, and it was about 116,000 tons. So that is about $895 a ton, which is 32 bucks a bushel. Not bad, I'm thinking. So again, I can sort of have a rough idea what my costs are just by using the government of Saskatchewan website. And I know what my revenues might be with canola and wheat. I know what my input costs are. So let's look at kidney beans. And I'm just pulling stuff out of the air here. These input costs I borrowed from soybeans. But it's looking pretty good. The kidney beans are way more profitable. So I'm subtracting the revenue, subtracting the inputs from the revenue. Way more profitable than wheat, and way more profitable than canola. Okay? So I just found something by doing nothing, right? Just a casual search. I might be all wet, but let's assume I'm not. And not only that, somebody in Saskatchewan is making some money, a little bit of money on this, I'm going to assume. So the US, I'm thinking that's probably the canning industry in California. But they're starting to flow into Korea, right? Is it not true that there's a little business getting going here in Korea, and there's another little business getting going there in Belgium, right? And I bet that if I phone Step and I ask them, do you guys know anybody in Korea who buys beans? I bet I'll have a list of buyers in probably at least overnight, maybe in 10 minutes. They probably have those, right? So I know I can do this if I want to. And so the question is, you know, am I going to do it? Am I going to grow a quarter section of kidney beans next year? And of course the answer is absolutely not. There's no way I would dare do that, right? So let's look at some of the issues here. One of them is that I might get something going, but I cannot be sure that I'm going to get the containers I want to run this business. And I'm not sure if I can get 20 foots for my beans. I might have to live with 40 foots when my buyer in Korea probably doesn't want them in 40 foots. Now there's this bureaucracy thing. So I've heard there's this thing called the commercial invoice. Well, what am I supposed to put on that? Am I supposed to do the bill of lading, make that out, or does the freight forwarder do that and send it to the trucker? I don't want to deal with this. This is a pain, right? Now the financing is scary too, because they told me there's this thing called the letter of credit, but I'm also told that the importer if the importer is not happy with the quality, then maybe the bank won't release the funds, right? So I'm scared. And then there's this whole issue of logistics, right? So let's imagine the processor's out here about an hour out of Regina. An empty container has to be shipped out there and then loaded up and then shipped back in here. That's going to cost me maybe $300 for that little trip. And there's a radius here, right? So maybe this processor has to be 50K in here. So it's inefficient. Now, here's the real problem. And that is that this processing industry is this ultra-competitive industry. The way it works is, if you do a bad job, things don't go well, you go bankrupt. If you do a good job, somebody acquires you, right? So if I say to this processor, I got this great idea with my kidney beans, he might just say, you know, get lost. I'm not changing the screens on my cleaner for you so you can do 1 container a month. Or the processor might say, thanks for the idea. And I've just trained one of my competitors. Or I might actually get something going and bring the whole house down on my head. And this is what I would say, is that in this business of agriculture, it's fiercely competitive, and they do not like upstarts who start doing a new product that they haven't thought about. And I'm not going to go in any further into that issue, but it's the truth. It's not easy to break into this. So I am absolutely not going to veer off from canola this year. I'm going to do wheat and canola because I know I'm going to get paid. So what I would say to Saskatchewan is, you know, as a producer, I want your help with this. You know, I don't want people to tell me which crops I can actually grow. I want choice. I want to be the one that's on the plane going over to Belgium and sitting down with the buyers. That should be my prerogative, and choose which crop I want to do. But without Saskatchewan's help, I can't really do that, right? So here's what I see as the road forward. And I'm just going to say initially that we have to do things differently. And that would be way differently. So the first thing we have to do is we've got to process and containerize at the rail side. And I'm not just talking about, okay, we've got the global transportation hub, let's find a company that's going to put a grain cleaner in there. No, we have to get a threshold volume coming through our city. Let's say 1 million tons a year, right? What's 1 million tons a year? That's like 40 or 50,000 containers. We have to do some volume if we're actually going to do this. And once we do that, the truck comes in, it dumps. We've got a cleaner there that's almost, it's a 2,000 bushel an hour cleaner that basically cleans almost as fast as we dump. We've got a few 12-chute color sorters there that's color sorting. We've got a high-speed bagging machine. We palletize, we containerize, we ship. The turnaround time, a few days. What's the turnaround time at one of our inland terminals? They do 8 or 7 or 6 or 9 times a year, right? So we're talking about totally having to disrupt the way things are done. So what I'm suggesting here is something we have not done yet, which is we want, at the global transportation hub, or at such a hub, we want a toll processing cluster to develop. So that means that these producers are buying and selling stuff from each other. They're selling or they're getting stuff processed and byproducts processed, and these processors themselves are working with each other and supplying each other. And then we have a whole whack of logistics companies that are doing the same thing, and it's all going to the railroad. And so in terms of processing, it could start with my beans, just cleaning up my beans, but it's going to go beyond that very, very quickly, where you've got testing and expelling and extruding and bagging and pelletizing and compressing and containerizing and all sorts of things. And here you're going to maybe start with some logistics companies, but then you're going to get freight forwarders in there, and there's couriers and mailing and trucking. I'll tell you what, if we could do this, other folks are going to start going out of business, just if it actually gets up and running. The other thing that's going to happen is that if we get a certain threshold and arrive at certain efficiencies, that trucker or that farmer who's happy right now that the grain company will pay them a check the same day it arrives in the truck is going to have the same option here, because trade finance is going to cluster here as well, and the grower is going to get paid right on the spot. Maybe. The next thing I'm saying is let's learn the Shandong lesson, right? So the reason I brought up China was a really good, because a colleague and I, we did a study about Shandong and China back in the 80s, right? And they sent these Chinese technicians over here, and we got them. We put them to work on farms, and we said, maybe the Chinese, maybe they could buy some of our used machinery. And maybe, they might be interested in some of our pink potash, right? And, the tables have completely changed. And if we're going to talk about this, we have to go back to China and say, do you guys have any suggestions? And one of the suggestions would be at the federal level, right? So one of the things they have is the National Development and Reform Commission, which is a body under the State Council that actually, strategizes over the long term for these key infrastructure products, and so one of the things they're doubling down on right now is e-commerce. So and maybe in the next couple of years, if you can imagine, 20% of China's retail is going to be online. Like if you could just imagine the logistics and opportunities there. They're doubling down on refrigeration and cold chain. So then the government comes back and it works with the federal government, it works with the customs offices and so on and so forth. They work on things like quality control, because everybody had this view of Chinese products that they dump chemicals on them and so on and so forth. And then at the industry level, the industry sort of aligns itself with all these government initiatives, and they cluster in these little logistics parks. And they work together. Like the Chinese are so good at just working together, sharing information when it builds out the whole pie. And is that true of agriculture? I don't think it is, right, in Saskatchewan. So here's what I think, and I'm just going to say this. Don't expect the operating company to do all the lifting. And this is just my personal feeling, is that we have treated the company out at the Global Transportation Hub kind of shabbily. And the reason I say that is basically we've said, you guys look after it and figure out, you've got business development people out there, you've got land, now you've got a highway, you figure it out, right? Not realizing really that we have these layers of government that all have to support it if it's ever has a hope of working. And so we've all kind of have to do something. We don't, for example, the federal government hasn't even figured out how to completely rationalize the trucking industry and these drayage regulations, so that everybody's on one page in all the provinces. So the provincial government then takes this hub and uses it as part of their export strategy, and they impose a governance structure on the thing, of course. And they articulate the value proposition to the public, and so on and so forth. And the municipal government is key, because if this were to work, it's not just a hub that's somewhere out there. The whole city becomes an inland port. It just happens, if we're talking really about a threshold volume of containers, it's going to affect the entire city, right? And so the municipal government does things like regulates and rationalize real estate developments, and there's labor force and traffic and this idea of near location. So one of the key issues with the hub was this idea of co-location. These related companies would all be working together with each other at the hub. But what happens once it succeeds is near location becomes just as important. And so that's with the city. And then the hub has its role that basically it's been playing, right? And what I would say about agriculture is that the hub has to play a little bit more of pronounced, have a little more influence on logistics and schedule integrity and things like that, so that the whole system sort of works together. The next thing we have to do is we have to look at Saskatchewan from space. And the reason I say we've got to look at it from space is because that's how our overseas buyers see us. They don't know what the border is between Saskatchewan and Manitoba is, and they don't even recognize this border. This is what they see, right? And so the prairie cities are not hubs. They are a string of nodes that have to be interconnected with each other, and they have to share information, and they have to draw on their own sort of strengths. The other thing we have to realize is that Saskatchewan's at the northern extreme of a vast sort of regional economy that sort of stretches down here. So yes, it's different, but it's not necessarily different if you don't live here, right? And then we have this massive psychological and physical barrier to us, and that's always going to be an issue for us, to get our products over the mountains. So here's what I would say, is that for this to really, really work, we need pan-ministry support. So not just the championship from one ministry, but all of the ministries that are potentially involved, which would be the ag, the transport, the trade and export development, the Ministry of the Economy. It's all has to be behind it. There has to be a robust governance, and with that governance, there has to be there's 3 or 4 pieces there that there's business development, there's the complex ag industry, and yeah, I mean those were the 2 that I wrote up there and that are the most prominent. But this idea of having a clear vision. Then we need a clear mandate. And I don't think anybody has ever said our mandate is to containerize agricultural products. It has to be that simple. This is our single-minded goal that we're going to pursue to make it work. And then we need a thoughtful strategy. So are we doing East Asia? Are we doing fractionated protein? Are we refrigerating stuff? Are we doing pulses? I don't know. And through all this is kind of what I think. I think that if we don't do something, that the world is kind of going on without us. We can make excuses for why containerization of agricultural products is not going to work, and I would have to agree with you. But if other people are doing it, if we can't afford not to do it, then what do we do? So that was a bit of a rant, and I'm done. So if anybody has any comments, we have some time for some feedback. Thank you. Wally.
So I see, when I travel around Canada and travel around the world, I see massive growth in container shipment. They redid the Panama Canal. When I'm out in Vancouver or Halifax, I see massive container yards and shipment. So, like, the technology's been invented. The technology can scale up, scale down. I guess I don't get it why we're not doing it here. I don't get it. Why are we not doing it here? The technology is everywhere. But we're not doing it here.
So one of the problems with the hub was and I promised myself I would do this. I was going to repeat the questions. So why are we not doing it? And if you go back to there, so we've assumed that the hub was we'll build it and they will come. And then when things didn't develop exactly how we wanted it, we kind of said we built it and they didn't come. But what I was trying to say with this slide was the simple fact that not one of these folks came. And there's good reason. If I was doing that, absolutely, I wouldn't come either. And so if you don't have somebody who's championing this idea and coordinating it, a government-sponsored push, is never going to happen. It can't. Aldine.
Paul, how are you linking into the plant protein cluster?
So the question is, what do I think of the plant protein cluster? And the
I asked, how are you linking?
How am I linking it? And so what Aldine is mentioning is what we have something called Protein Industries Canada, which is a cluster that we have developed, and we've brought down a big pot of money from the federal government for innovation, and I guess we're focusing on fractionating protein in Saskatchewan. So what that means is the concept is basically that we take peas or faba beans or whatever it happens to be, we fractionate the proteins, we take the proteins, the starch and the fiber, we split it apart right here in Saskatchewan, and we start sort of developing markets for all of those things. And then we're not shipping it to China for them to do that, and we're keeping some of the value here. So that's a horrible synopsis, but I think that's what the idea is. And the idea that they've been working on is that this could be another Cinderella crop like canola. I mean, if it goes well, and the big players are there. So Aldine's question was, how does this fit in with that project? And what I would say is that, if I was working on that project and I was starting to spend 135 or 153 million bucks, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole unless the scaffold is there for the project to succeed. What is that scaffold? It's access to containers and infrastructure to ship them in volume. And to me, absolutely, what I just talked about is crucial for the success of that project. And I'm not sure how big a priority it is. I don't know how huge, is transportation infrastructure an afterthought? I don't know, but I think it's a huge part of the puzzle. Sean?
Paul, can you comment on the railways here? Because you talked about logistics, how that would work at a hub, but there still is this problem of capacity on the rails. Now, is that like a coordination issue, or how?
Well, I don't have really a good map of the railway, and the railway is quite complex, right? So if you look at the map, it's really spaghetti here. And one of the problems, what I'd say about the railways with Saskatchewan is, we've had this idea, we've got Canadian Pacific, that goes to Vancouver, and Canadian National, that goes to Vancouver and Prince Rupert. And this one does this and that one. I think we have to completely reshuffle the deck and say, how can these lines actually work with each other to do a two-way, like a backhaul kind of thing, and completely rethink what railroad is doing what. And one of the problems with our railroads has been, and I have no idea how true this is, but I heard someone from industry just commenting that really CN is the container railroad right now, and the CP has really backed off. And I think CP, maybe when that one of these maritime shippers went bankrupt and they lost a container shipper during that period. So they're doing much less. So to answer your question, what has to happen with the railways? It's a lot, right? That a lot of coordination has to happen with the railways And that has to be done at the federal level, the provincial level, and at the municipal level. Any other questions?
Well, maybe it's a more philosophical question or comment. The government is typically not good at running anything. That's the overall comment. And so, but the GTH is really become, instead of becoming an economic development opportunity, has really become a land base that we can put things on. And basically, the government's become a landlord. Let's just find people to fill that space. And so I guess, how do you shift the mentality of government from being that and perhaps getting out of trying to run a thing that they don't understand into something that could be more productive?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the answer is. And my position when I wrote up this thing was, you know, let's let them figure it out. If the position is that we have to do this somehow, then somebody has to get their heads together and do it. And one of the frustrating things for me, or it's not frustrating, but kind of interesting things for me was that I basically didn't tell you one single new thing the whole time I talked for 40 minutes. It all got thought through in the mid-2000s. We've been here before. And the problem is that we didn't do what we were supposed to do to support this hub so that it could thrive. And part of it has to do with critical mass, and part of it has to do with the government saying to business, you know, look, you know, we're thankful for all you do for our province, but on this one, we're taking the lead and we're organizing. And my feeling is that governments often, especially in agriculture, say, let's let the big guys make the decisions, and they're good at making things efficient. They're good at making money, so we should ask them how to do it. And I'm saying no. We got to completely reshuffle the deck and do it differently. So who pushes it? I have no idea.
I would argue that it wasn't well thought through, whatever year you say. They created the hub, and the hub's going to magically take care of itself, and yet you have all these roles it can't possibly occupy. They need to be occupied by the federal government, the provincial government. So I don't think it was that well thought through. I don't see how, if this is the result, and the hub is magically going to be an international partner with hubs around the world, and the freight's going to they're going to magically take care of the freight. So I'm not sure that it was originally thought through.
Well, I mean, one of the problems was the idea of a hub is a bad concept, and I talked to that earlier, that this is not going to start one leg at a time. This is an integrated project. It includes the 2 ports out in Vancouver. It includes the railroads. It includes the shipping companies. It includes, you know, the people who are going to be using the services. And all of those stakeholders have to work together on this project. And so is it just because we kind of didn't get to where we were supposed to be, does that mean that back in 2004 when we put our chips down on containerization that we were wrong? No. I mean, now's the time to double down. This is, you know, it's kind of like our last chance. If we sell the hub property for its real estate value, where are we at? I mean, it's depressing. Lee.
Where is AGT in any of this? And forgive that if there's nowhere, but do they ever?
They're a huge elephant in the room, and I was waiting for the question, because what has happened is that CP is going to back off on containerization, and the current CEO at one point said, we're not going to bet the farm on our international business. And CN has totally stepped up and said, you know, look, we will, if you guys have an idea for, you know, needs by the CN line, then we'll meet you halfway there. So what AGT has done has sort of partnered with I don't know how it works, but basically they've partnered with CN, and there's a whole new development, you know, in the south part of the city called the Chuka Creek development or something like that, that the university or that City of Regina approved. And so they're developing there a parallel kind of development. And one of the things people ask me is, they say, what about that development, right? And I say, great. You know, what we're talking about here for this to work is critical mass. And so if we have, 50 or 60,000 containers moving through here, we'll need everybody on board. But what I don't want with the Chuka Creek development is for the government to say, okay, AGT's out there, they'll figure it out. And they'll make Saskatchewan prosperous. I want, my vision for this thing is that there will be 300 farmers who are taking advantage of these international business opportunities. That's what I want. I mean, that's what's interesting to me. And so AGT is an example of what is possible if we diversify our agricultural products. But that is not where we should be aspiring toward. We should be aspiring to have 500 AGTs in the province of Saskatchewan. Okay. Well, Tim, were you going to say something?
We need more animals.
And to consume?
We need consumers, and so we're not getting more people, so we should get more animals.
And sell feed to them.
The fractionation of protein is going for human consumption, but what's left then goes into the feed market.
With your business, what are your chief constraints with transportation?
Right now, none. It's a growing side opportunity for us, and so as we just came back from Southeast Asia, looking in China and Thailand, so container traffic is going to increase for us, and CP, CN, you need to play them off against each other just to keep costs in line, but you need two options, one way or the other. And so, as things evolve, and again, markets in other countries start to pick up, more animal protein into the middle classes of particularly China, Southeast Asia, then that's a new opportunity. And to your point, Paul, I guess, don't be hasty in selling something that is a real estate play. Those things never develop overnight, 10 years, whatever, in the first place. So you've got to be patient.
And part of it is just getting done too, right? That road infrastructure is just getting wrapped up, right? Okay, well, I think that's probably